down. So the first thing we want to understand is what difficult conversations or difficult circumstances brings up for us and what it does to our brains as well. So what gets in the way of having a good conversation? We want to be aware of that as well. So just starting at thinking, yeah, what gets in the way? And so we're going to go through this in a little bit more detail, but we, number one, are emotional beings. And I'm trying to slow down my talking a little bit. Emotional beings. And so we experience something, maybe, and we'll make it very VHL related. I remember when I first got diagnosed with VHL, I was 30. My mom had brain tumors, but nobody mentioned that there was anything that could possibly be in our family. And so my mom was very seriously impacted by VHL. So when I got diagnosed with VHL, that was the stimulus, we call that. So that was something that happened. My emotion was, I was very sad. I was very scared. And now that I think back, the thought I had right away was, oh no, what if I die? So I didn't spend a lot of time there because my natural reaction is to do things as a result of what happened. So one of the things we want to pull apart and make a little bit slower is when something happens, number one, notice your feeling. And so even sometimes we can feel like, I think Gina, it was you that was saying this, people don't get it. People don't understand VHL. And so, you try to tell your family and they don't, get it. Like the example of, oh, they took the brain tumor out. That's great. You'll never come back. I hope that's the case, but we all know that we're probably walking around with more than just that one tumor, wherever it is in our body, and we're at risk of other treatments again. So just being aware of, oh, what's the emotion that I feel? And can we just pause there? We'll talk more about emotions, but, and then what are the thoughts that go with the emotion? And we want to, I call it catch the thought. So the thought will come in, and the thought in my case was, I'm going to die. I was 30 then. I am 53. Clearly, that thought was not a fact. It was a thought, but it triggered then behavior. And that behavior, some of it was helpful, some of it was not so helpful. I got right away into action. I didn't take very good care of myself because I felt very stressed out. And so we want to take stimulus, so the instigating situation. Notice what our emotions are. Our emotions only last for about 30 to 90 seconds. And then after that, it's our thoughts that will make that emotion continue. And I'm not saying if you feel sad, don't feel sad. But if we notice, oh, I'm feeling sad, then what is it that you want to do at that point? Maybe you need to take a break and have a cry. Maybe you need to go for a walk. Maybe you need to pause and talk to somebody who is understanding, and just being aware of that and being aware of catching those thoughts. And then just checking that thought to go, oh, that thought, I'm going to die in my situation. Do I know that to be absolutely true? So we want to take that thought and we want to try to find the facts there. And am I scared that I might die? For sure, but it's not actually the truth, so that we can pause and that we can use language around that. And the same thing in a conversation. If somebody is, I went to the, and I'm just using my examples, but I went to the doctor, I had chronic pain, and the doctor said to me, I don't know what we're going to do with you. This is impossible. And so I can only see Andrea's face, but it is a face of support. I was devastated. And so I had a reaction that wasn't super kind. I just said, can you imagine being in my situation when you say that? Now, that's not the worst reaction. I wish I hadn't reacted that way, but to press pause for a second, go, whoa, that makes this feel hopeless for me. And even if I can't come back with a good comment, I could just at least say, whoa, that doesn't feel good. And then we could have a conversation. So even when you're thinking about setting boundaries or someone isn't understanding, hey, this conversation doesn't feel good for me right now. And the boundary that might be, my boundary might have been, when we think about boundaries, we think about what's okay and what's not okay. It's okay that you're frustrated with trying to fix me, but it's not okay to talk to me like that. It's okay that you're hopeful that I got my brain tumor removed and that you're all happy about it, but I'm still worried about the other ones. So can you be compassionate about that too? So sometimes it's just pausing, recognize, even if we can't recognize the emotion or what we need, just pause for a sec. Yeah, that doesn't feel good. What do you need? So, and we'll talk more about boundaries in a minute. And so communication and the brain, we are hardwired. Our brains are made to connect with other people. And when we feel like people don't understand us, it activates the part of the brain that makes us feel like we're in danger. So I'll use a Canadian example of being chased by a bear. Being chased by a bear is terrifying. I have never been chased, but I have had one in my campsite that tried to eat meat off of our barbecue. It was terrifying. And so we have 4 reactions to that. Flocking is also a very familiar VHL way that we react to something that feels dangerous. Is that I see this with caregivers or other people that have VHL. Flocking means that we take care of other people more effectively than we take care of ourselves. We also call it fawning. So we deny our own needs to take care of others. Now, that's really helpful when a bear is chasing after us and we can gather up our kids and keep them safe, but we don't want that as a chronic behavior. So just know that when we don't feel somebody is connected with us, they're not hearing what we're saying, or we're getting into a disagreement, or they're not allowing us to have a boundary, we tend to either take care of others in that situation, or we freeze. We just don't even know what to say. It's all very natural responses, but it's because our brain feels like we're in a place of danger, like something is chasing us. Flight, which means we could withdraw from that relationship or that situation. Or even I see that with some VHL patients, they're like, actually, I don't get my scans. I'm not doing anything. So they either like move away from taking care of themselves or by freezing or just moving in the other direction. Or you'll see that with people that have been really hurt. They don't engage in the conversation again because they're just too afraid. And those are all normal reactions, but just know that these are reactions. And what we want to do is change from reacting to responding. And then the last one is fighting. So we get really defensive, we get argumentative. And again, we want to press pause because we can think, oh, I feel threatened here, or this doesn't feel good. I need to take a break and just reflect on what I need, or I need to get outside and take a break, or I need to reach out to somebody and talk to them. Those are all activities that help to complete the stress response. So even paying attention to that can be very helpful. So when people are really triggered and stressed out, can you think of, I'm going to take you off the sharing the screen. Is there something that you know, and this is not a magic wand, but what helps you feel more calm and less stressed out? Is it talking to somebody who you know really cares for you? Is it taking a break and doing something? For some of us, it's doing something creative, getting outdoors, pausing and breathing. I personally text a friend. Anybody share what they do to help them just, we call it regulation in psychology. You don't have to call it regulation. Calm is nice, or just feel like you're, able to get another psychological thing. We call it get back online. Anybody know anything that helps them when they're feeling really triggered in a tough communication situation? Elizabeth, do you have something? You took yourself off mute. So if you do that, I'm fine.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of feel like I need just time by myself.
Okay, good.
To figure out exactly what I need to respond with,
Okay. Yeah. Good noticing. Yeah. And that may be something that we ask for. It's one of the things that we teach in conflict management. And the conflict might be inner. It may not be like, a battle with somebody. It might be internal, but pressing pause, like taking a break. Also in high conflict, we teach that, but it's not something that we've been like brought up with for the most part. I mean, maybe we got put in a timeout, but that's not what I'm talking about. We didn't put my doctor in a timeout, although I wanted to. It's us taking a pause and going, look, this is too much for me to navigate. I need to take a break. And if you're having a conversation with somebody, it's really important that you set a time to meet again, because people are kind of a traumatic response. So Melissa and I are having an argument about, I don't know, something. And if I say, hey, I need a break, and she's like, okay, where'd you go? It's important to say, I need a break. And can we resume this at 1 o'clock? Very important that we reconnect the time, but it's probably one of the best conflict management tools that we can teach. And if you work if it's a work environment and there's going to be conflict, or if it's a relationship and it can be kind of conflictual, set that out before you start the conversation. Hey, can we give each other permission to take a break? Because I want to have a good conversation. And I know sometimes I get a little heated or I can't even think straight. So set that up from the beginning. It's a great, great tool. When our heart goes over 100 beats a minute, which goes pretty quickly in conflict, we actually can't process information. So that can be pretty helpful. And you don't have to take your pulse, although I do know marriage counselors that literally have pulsometers on their clients, so they can say, hey, your heartbeat's getting close to 100. Let's not talk. Let's just press pause and find ways to regulate. So taking a break, great plan. Anyone else have something that they know that works well to get calm? And it may not be calm in 2 seconds. It may be calm in an hour, but we know something that just helps us just to move out, go take a walk, a breathing practice, text a friend. Anybody have any tools that they use?
I'll say one.
Oh, go ahead, Melissa, and then Andrea.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Andrea.
No, you're good.
I totally meditate.
Okay.
And I learned this from the NIH. Before one of my surgeries, they had me sit in a chair. They had us sit in a chair, and we had to sit in a chair, and they just half the patient sat in a chair, and I have an app on my phone, and I would recommend it to all of you. It's called Health Journeys, and it works whether you're awake or asleep. And it's for headaches, and it's for pain, or anything. I have a ton of them, but I have a whole folder for anything. But it's very helpful to me to go and take that time to because I find that when I get in conflict, my pain gets worse.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's similar to other VHL patients also.
It's similar to all pain.
Yeah.
Yeah. All stress. Yeah.
Yeah.
Instigates pain. So yeah.
I'll just say to my family, at least they know. And my counselors encouraged me to go take a break and go meditate for a while and lay down and meditate. So I have several apps that help.
Good.
They just say, whether, and I'll lay down on my bed or in a chair, and it'll say, take a deep breath, and your pain is good. And there's actually, through the health journeys, there's some that are good for y'all to listen to that are encourage success for your surgeries.
Oh,
and
good.
They say you're going to have a successful surgery. You will not have any infections, and it makes you not be scared. And not feeling afraid, then you're more confident.
Yeah.
And you can
so
communicate.
good. Yeah, awesome. And Liz also said the same thing, practice mindfulness and meditation. And so we kind of need to know what works for us, and we need to practice it in less triggering moments, because otherwise we can't have access to it. I'm not thinking about meditating when I want to tell somebody exactly what to do in an unkind way. Gina, were you going to say something? Oh, Andrea, you were going to say something.
Yeah, just that sometimes definitely like taking a break, but saying things out loud, typically sometimes I have to say things or repeat things out loud. It's because thinking it in your head and saying it out loud almost has such a different effect.
Andrea, you are so right. So either say it out loud, and the brain does not care if nobody else is there. So talking out loud, having the fight like out loud without the other person, totally a great tool, or writing it out. Really, really helpful. Again, it helps the brain process it. It relieves the pressure. The brain cannot tell the difference, again, whether it's you're saying it to somebody. So even just going crazy in a journal and being like, this is insane. I can't believe my mom doesn't get this. 14th surgery. Why does she act this way? Getting it out on paper or talking it out, very helpful. So that can be a great tool. Listening to music, if you are a musical person, listening to music would be helpful regardless. But especially if you really are attached to music, even like Melissa's talking about, like, a visualization about you will be successful, you will not have an infection. Music does have the opportunity to transform what we would call neural pathways, so kind of brain functioning. So if you had a song that is going to be, that is either soothing or it's your fight song, except not the fight song where you're going to fight somebody else, but that you're just like going to, I can do this, I can move through, but it allows us to self-soothe. That can be really helpful. But again, you would have to pick it beforehand, because growing through your Apple Music when you're like super ticked off is not going to help. You won't find what you need, but practice it. So same thing we talk about in VHL support calls, which our next one is March 6th. Which is not easy to get to from Italy because it would be the middle of the night, Eleanor, sorry. But we talk more about these tools, and we talk about, having that scanxiety. So you've had a scan. I just had an MRI on Friday and we had a long weekend. I was like, how is this possible? And I know that those technicians know exactly what's going on. And I'm like, come on, tell me. And so thankfully I only had to wait till Tuesday, but even in, that space between somebody knows and you don't, and what if they have bad news, and what is your life going to look like? All the things is like, okay, what do we need in that space? So music has the possibility of really being regulating, and you may have to use all those things, right? Journaling, mindfulness, getting outside, those kinds of things. Sun is very good for you. Even if it's sun where it's -40, where I am, very good for you. And so if you can't get outside, you don't want to look at the sun through, well, you can look at the sun through glass, but even if you open your screen and let the sun shine in your face, it's very, very good for stress levels. So, and it's not even about the vitamin D is all good for you. But again, sun really sets the circadian rhythm, and circadian rhythm and stress and well-being have a lot to do with each other. So any of those little tools, I call it your medicine. In indigenous cultures, they talk about like having your own medicine. And so what is it that bolsters that well-being? And that's going to help you as well when you're navigating situations as well. And so today we're just focusing primarily on communication. But when we think about, a lot of people are very afraid of conflict. And so, and what we're afraid of is disconnection. And so what we want to think about is, even when we navigate conflict, we often feel like the problem is in between us. So it's in our relationship, and it affects the relationship. But we want to think about what is the actual problem we're trying to solve. And when I work with high conflict teams, as an example, I do a lot of corporate and leadership work. We'll actually put the problem and say, what do we identify the problem to be? Because it's feeling really hard on a relationship, but what is the problem, right? So let's say, I don't know, something feels really hard with VHL and I'm having an argument with my husband, which I don't even know how the argument happened, right? But I'm feeling stressed, he's feeling stressed. Okay, just wait a minute, because we're fighting, but what is the actual problem? We need to find our way through, I'll use a very Canadian thing, it's snowy out, it's during traffic, and we need to get there for the MRI, and we're both feeling vulnerable. So it's not, the problem is we need to get to the MRI and it's not easy to get there, and we're taking it out on each other. And I'm holding on my cup because I literally will remind people when we're working through conflict, wait a minute, what's the problem? And the problem is outside of us. And so how do we navigate and stay connected and move kind of like towards the problem together? Because it's a double issue. The conflict makes us feel alone, which is very devastating for a brain. We are hardwired for connection. And now I'm having conflict and I feel vulnerable because this problem is already making me feel vulnerable. How do I get to my MRI with, car trouble or, snowstorm, or, my doctor was supposed to call me on Tuesday and it's already Thursday. So I'm just like strung out. Wait a minute. What's the problem? The problem is not you and I. How can we stay connected? Turning towards the problem and partnering towards the problem. And so even if it's, I don't know, a relative and it's around VHL, some of you kind of hinted at that, and they're giving you all this advice. Wait a minute. The problem is I'm trying to navigate this in my VHL journey and you're trying to help me. But the problem is VHL. And how can we work together to give me what I need if you're the VHL, if that's your situation? How can we work together? And then we can bring up some boundaries going, because what you're doing, I know you're trying to be helpful, so we can be empathic, but it's not feeling helpful. It's feeling like you're trying to solve something that can't be solved right now. This feels terrible for me. I'm extremely stressed out and it's not solvable. What I need from you is, and so we ask for what we need. So we're going to talk about a framework around that as well. And so thinking about, again, I was going to bring up that emotional piece. Again, one of the ways that we can also regulate our emotion is by recognizing the emotion that we feel. And so what happens when emotions, so let's say last week I had an MRI, I was feeling vulnerable, and I know fully that is not the worst thing we face as VHL patients, but it's still, it's a hard thing, right? We feel really vulnerable. We're like, please let this be okay. The fact that I'm not feeling anything, but I'm sure we've all had it that we felt fine, and then sometimes we still get bad news. So it feels vulnerable. What happens is emotions are processed in the very, very basic part of our brain, which is in the back of our head, which is where we get all the brain tumors, but not in the same spot. It's in the brain stem, but brain stem, what we normally notice as VHL patients is breathing issues, heartbeat issues, and then cerebellum, where we have balance issues and those kinds of things. And very occasionally we get tumors in other situations. But that part of our brain, the brain stem, is really basic. Breathing, heartbeat, it regulates your temperature, and some other things. It's complicated, but the basics are there. And that's where emotions are processed. And all the brain does is with emotions is it goes, does this emotion feel terrible, or is this an okay emotion? Joy. I like that feeling, sort of. But if you've had a hard life, you're like, when is this going to end? Is this a bad feeling? Is Wellerig really going to? We talked about that on our last support call. The people are like, how do I handle the joy of knowing things are shrinking? Like, how do I live in that space? So we can talk about more about joy another time. So the brain at the back of the head is where emotions are experienced, but the brain doesn't make good sense of emotions there. It just goes, is this emotion dangerous or is it safe? Danger is like fight, flight, freeze. fawn, take care of everybody else, forget about myself. And so that doesn't feel good. Or it's safe. Oh, I feel content. I meditated. My body doesn't feel as bad at pain. I feel good right now. Wonderful. But it has a hard time making sense of it. It's just safety or danger. So when we recognize the emotion and go, oh, I'm trying to think, I just saw insecure. Having my MRI, I probably felt a little bit insecure. I'm like, am I okay? Am I not okay? When we recognize the emotion, it takes the intensity of the emotion. If it's a tough emotion, it reduces it by about 25%. So one of the best things you can do if you're in a conversation that isn't going well, bring it back to yourself. What am I feeling? What we usually do is I'm feeling mad because that person's a jerk. Very, very smart. I like it. It's instant. But what we want to do is pause and go, I feel insecure right now. And we want to have the most generous interpretation of the other person, because otherwise it incites the dangerous part of our brain again. Oh, that person is a jerk and they're like a bear for me, right? They're like chasing me down. So what am I feeling? Can I just be with this emotion? Can I be kind to myself with this emotion? Because I also notice in VHL patients, me included, there's a lot of shame, and shame drives the message that we're not enough. I shouldn't feel this way. I had an MRI on Friday. My son just had an eye tumor treated on Thursday, right? So obviously, why should I feel bad for myself at all? Like, it's an MRI, who cares? It's still troublesome. So giving ourselves permission to feel what we feel, noticing the emotion, being kind to ourselves. Try not to compare yourself to other people or how you think you should handle it. It will last for about 60 to 90 seconds if we don't attach a thought to it. So again, like me getting diagnosed, immediately I feel scared, which I didn't even care about. I just went right to, I'm going to die. And I literally made 22 casseroles. I am not joking. You can talk to my therapist, because I was like, 6 months later, I had developed chronic pain from the stress. And I was like, if I die, I don't want to be a burden to my family. So I was doing all this. We can talk another day about what anxiety does. But so I just went straight into action, and it wasn't really helpful for me. It didn't let me feel my feelings. Breathe, notice those feelings, go for a walk, talk to a friend, or identify your senses. Like, what do I taste right now? What do I hear? What do I smell? We're trying to use the mid part of our brain to regulate the basic part of our brain. But recognizing the emotion is going to help reduce the intensity, because you're like, oh, I feel disappointed. And the brain right away is like, Melissa, you're a rock star. Thank you. And it almost takes the feeling and puts it in a little filing cabinet that makes sense and files it and goes, oh, this fits perfectly. Right. Of course you're disappointed. So try not to shit on yourself. Try to be kind to yourself and just breathe through that emotion. Notice what the emotion feels like in your body. That helps you stay with the emotion without attaching thought to it. Because I might be laying in the MRI and I'm like, oh, I feel insecure. I don't even notice that. I'm like, they're going to find something bad. This feeling makes me feel terrible. This probably is a bad reason. There's a reason behind it. So just be aware of that. If we're having a conversation, because that's what we're talking about today, again, what I mentioned before was identify the purpose of the conversation. Let's pause for a sec. Wait a minute. We're both getting kind of dug in here. Is there a problem that we're trying to solve? And if it's me being the VHL patient and you're trying to solve my problem, what's okay is you caring, like be empathic. I call this an MRI. So we can have it, we know this well, it's a metaphor, not the actual thing. So we've had CAT scans and we have MRIs. CAT scan in a relationship can be like, they're out to get me. My jerk of a brother-in-law is always telling me what I should do. I should be eating more blueberries. I heard that on, some news channel that cures cancer. You're like, right. So wait, what are you trying to solve here? And if they're trying to solve something in you, what's the boundary? It's okay. Think MRI. What's the most respectful interpretation I can have of this person's reaction? Oh, I think you're feeling really stressed right now and you're trying to solve this problem for me. I don't need you to solve the problem. What I need you to do is just listen and try not to tell me anything to do. Or I don't want to have this conversation. let's talk about something else. If people don't take your boundaries, I have a client, and with her permission, she says, I know that I have a sister-in-law who doesn't do boundaries. She does not. But I know 3 things that she cannot resist talking about. And one is her hair, which is awesome. The other one is her kids, and the other one is COVID. So she said, she goes, I know if I'm not comfortable in a conversation, I've tried before the really nice, like, hey, I get that you're trying to care for me, but I don't need your opinion. Like, I'm figuring this out. I just need you to listen. She can't do it. She's just like, what do you mean you need me to listen? Like, this is a disaster. So she hangs out bait like a stinky fish. And she's like, oh, did you get your hair highlighted? I love the blonde highlights. And the woman cannot resist it. So that can be a great way for you to be able to set a boundary without, if the person's not able to take it. So think about something that's distracting for them. If they're not well enough to take your boundary, then find a way to change the subject. In our family, we have a very difficult family member. And so if we're together in a group, we have a symbol or we have a saying that's like, excuse me, I need to check on somebody or something that is it's relevant. But it's so we can keep ourselves safe. Because the other thing is we tend to then sometimes step out of sight of our own integrity and we snap at somebody, right? Like I did with the doctor. And that's okay. I didn't mean to. I can have compassion for myself, but she's a person, she's trying, she just said something that she probably didn't mean to say either. And so think about those values also. So having a couple of values that we think about that's really important to us that feels like integrity. But having those ways that we can think about how we can stay within integrity. And integrity doesn't even always mean that we're snapping at somebody. It can sometimes mean that I'm resentful. So I'm thinking about, somebody and I'm so resentful, maybe because I couldn't set a boundary. I couldn't ask for what I want. That doesn't feel like integrity either when I'm seething with rage about, oh, I just feel like they take advantage of me. That doesn't feel good either. And that's very stressful when we're that situation. So doing what we can to speak up with kindness and integrity. We can be kind and clear at the same time. And we want to start soft. And so almost 50 years of research by the top researcher, his name is John Gottman, has studied intimate relationships, so partnerships. And he has noticed that 96% of conversations end the way they start. So we want to start with a soft startup. And so I love this framework is try to avoid the criticism. And so you can say what you need with complaining, but not blaming. And so how we start with a complaint is, I feel. So in the situation, if I had a redo with the doctor, which I did have a redo with the doctor, was I feel, she said, I don't know what to do with you. I had terrible pain. And she said, so I just said, hey, so I couldn't say that in the moment. I snapped at her. The next time I saw her, I just said, hey, when you said that, I felt really dismissed. And I felt so terrified that there was going to be nothing that you could do for me. And so what I need is for you not to say things that annihilate my hope. If nothing, I don't care if you feel like there's no hope, I can't hear it. And so in that situation, next time, could you be empathic and say, you noticed you were feeling hopeless. Please don't say it. But could you say, Leona, what's this like for you? Because I imagine this feels really hopeless. And then you can end with, a question. I might, if I didn't know exactly what to say, I might just say, what could you do? What do you think that you could have done differently? Because it just left me feeling terrible. So you can see that then you're starting with I language, number one, not you language. You language can make people feel defensive. And it feels vulnerable, but it's really brave to be able to say, hey, I felt really hurt by that. Or I felt, whatever that is. You can give some empathy, and empathy is just about aligning with what you imagine they felt not their behavior. I'm not saying her behavior was appropriate. But just, I imagine you felt overwhelmed because I've been coming to you every 2 weeks for 9 months trying to get this fixed and it's not working. So emotion, when we provide empathy based on what we guess they were feeling, it makes people feel understood and it helps to lower the chances of conflict. But when we can start like this, so I felt or I feel, this is what I think I need. And you can change what you need the next day. Because the other thing, sometimes when we ask for what we need, we're like, I asked that we don't talk about this ever again. And I realized that's not what I need. But I asked that yesterday. You are allowed to amend your need. So, hey, yesterday I said that I can't talk about it, but I actually need to talk about it because it's getting in the way. We're not, like, I feel like there's a big elephant in the room. Describe the situation and end with curiosity. I just worked this morning with a high conflict situation with a team, and we just talked about it. Like, so what did you need from that person, or what would you like from that person? So you could say, like, I felt really disappointed. I need more empathy in that situation. I can't hear that you felt it was hopeless. And what do you think that you could try differently? So you can certainly ask for what you need, but also get curious, because when people feel like they're part of the co-creation of a solution, it's going to be much better off. Any questions so far? I'm just blabbing away. This is not what a support call normally looks like. Today is just to teach out about tough conversations. Anybody have any questions?
Hi, it's
Hi.
me.
Yeah.
I don't have a question, more like a comment when you were talking about the feelings and the part of the brain that regulates them. And I mean, we all have like a way to communicate since we were kids. That
Yes.
is not always the best because we learn about our parents and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah.
But in BHL, what we notice is, for example, the surgeries can affect the way that you communicate, because the surgeries may affect the self-regulating at the brain.
Yes.
So, for example, after Mao's last surgery in 2 years ago, it was very difficult for him to regulate when he was feeling something. So he get mad very quickly. So we have to learn, well, I have to learn to know that. And he has to learn how to accept that I was telling him, we called it the tunnel. How do you say tunnel in English?
Tunnel? Is it a tunnel?
Yeah, the tunnel. We call, you are getting into the tunnel. So that's our code now, because when he's getting like, not just mad, also when he's getting sad or something, it's like our strategy is like not getting to the tunnel. So it's hard. It's complex because it's not just the way that we do, is the surgery and all the stressful things that we are living. So just want
Thank you for, so a couple things. This is not a magic wand, and I say this with all the compassion. Couple things. Surgery obviously is very hard, whatever kind of surgery, very hard. So you're more tired, you're on medication, you're experiencing pain, you're, all of those things are very challenging. So finding, again, some things that are regulating: music, meditation or mindfulness, being outside, walking to whatever extent that's possible. Touch is very important. And the brain, again, cannot tell around touch. So if I'm feeling really starting to get or even just stressed, like, I just wish I would get better faster, there's something wrong with me, even just practicing touch that feels good for you, that you are doing to yourself. We are all basically walking babies. So reminds the brain that you're safe. And so even a brain that's been damaged by surgery, or when we're feeling vulnerable because we're recovering from surgery that's been very hard, soothing touch can be helpful. So even when you talk about the tunnel, and I love that you have language around it, I'm sorry about the tunnels, practice things that help. So somebody might be getting really angry and dysregulated. Does it help if they take a break and, so warm things also help us calm down. So we don't deal with the behavior, we just deal with what helps to regulate them. So maybe getting hugged at that point would make them feel crazier. I cannot do that. The hugs, forget it. So, but I love, and maybe it's because I'm Canadian, I literally live with a heating pad. So my husband knows that he's like, wait a minute, if I kind of become dysregulated, he doesn't take the bait of she's ticked off. What he does is he takes the signal, she's suffering. And he'll say to me, Leona, do you want your heat bag? That's my signal to know he's trying to love me. And I'm like, yes, I need that. And so then that's just my job that I know. And my brain, in the very most basic reptile part, recognizes, okay, I'm being cared for here. I might still be, dysregulated, but it's one small thing. So pay attention to those one small things, and they may be very small. I need fresh air. Okay, somebody sees the other one being dysregulated. Can I open the window for you? But you need to decide what you could try beforehand. And what you can do is go back to the situation in your mind and go, hey, remember when you were going down the tunnel? What do you think might have been helpful? And I'm talking drinking through a straw is very regulating, oddly. So somebody goes, hey, can I bring you a cup of, iced tea? And I'll get a straw. Reminds me I'm being cared for, but our trigger as a caregiver is their suffering. But our job as the person who is suffering is to think of some little things that are helpful. So in my case, don't touch me. But if you say to me, do you want me to warm up your heat bag? Even in the most basic part of my brain, I can connect. Yes, let's start there. And then I might still be mad, but there's something that's regulating. It's very soothing for the brain. So thinking of that. The other thing is a lot of people with brain surgery go on steroids. That is extremely hard on you emotionally. So you might, the regulating, things may not be that helpful, but you can still talk about it. What do you need? And you can still focus on any aspect of well-being to help them stay regulated, but it's really outside of their control. That in Canada, we call it Decadron or Dexa something. It's very hard on you emotionally. So even if you are the patient going through that, if you notice you cry more, you get ticked off more, like really elevated, it is the meds. It is absolutely the meds. So talk about beforehand if that's going to happen. What do you think might be helpful? And experiment with that. Weighted blankets, super, super good for you. So maybe that's the, hey, can I get your weighted blanket? Does touch help, but maybe a hug doesn't help, but maybe, can I just hold your hand for a minute? I see that you're suffering. Could be helpful. And trust your intuition, because it feels very dysregulating, but it does hit it does connect to the basic need of the brainstem that's dysregulated during that emotion to do those regulating things, like something warm. And if you live in a warm climate, you're like, having something warm feels insane to me. But we still are mammals. Sucking out of a straw, something weighted, touch, it can be your own touch, being wrapped up tight, a warm bath, all helps the brainstem re-regulate. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, Lizeth, because that is really, really, really tough. So one thing that we want to also be thinking about is how can we listen more effectively to others? And so this lines up with that as well. So we watch for facts and information. Leona's mad. She's dysregulated. She's, saying things that she wishes she does not saying. And I want to listen below the surface of what's happening. And what I want to listen for is emotions, and that we can be empathic about those emotions. What are we noticing there about those emotions? I can see you're really struggling, or I can see you're so frustrated. And so what we see on the outside is very little. It's just facts and information. So can we listen for feelings and emotions? Oh, yeah, that sounds so hard. And then coming back with some empathy for ourselves, which we call self-compassion, and empathy for the other. Even if they're being, really hard to handle, I can see that you're really suffering. And then I'm being empathic, and empathic is just about aligning with the emotions that they might be feeling. I can see you're really struggling. Yeah, I'm struggling. This is terrible. I'm not getting better as fast as I want. I feel terrible. I have a brutal headache. I'm worried I have a leak, which only VHL people know. May you all have no leaks. Right? There's so many things that we worry about. So listen deeply. So even if you are in a conflict, try to regulate and just go, what is going on for myself? So we talked about that already. Recognize those emotions, being kind to ourselves. And what are we noticing in the other? Maybe they're saying something like, I don't think I'm ever going to get better. That's a belief. And you don't have to say, oh, that's a belief. It's not true. Leona said, not all our thoughts are facts. Can I have empathy for a belief? Have I ever had a belief that's held me back? 100%. So having some compassion for that, and it tends to reduce defensiveness in us. It doesn't mean we don't ask for what we want, but it reduces defensiveness in us because we're like, yeah, they're struggling too. This is a crappy situation to be in together. Then if we're feeling defensive, try to get curious. So instead of getting critical, say, we call this like a sentence extender or a conversation enhancer. So when you say that, I'm curious about that part, or tell me more about that. Let's say somebody's telling you what to do. And you're like, tell me more about what's important to you when you say that. Like, you tell me to do this and this and this, and tell me more. Part of you is like, Leona, why did we come? I don't want them to talk anymore. It's okay to put up a boundary. But if there's like your partner, and this conversation has happened several times, maybe get to the deeper part. Tell me more about this. What makes this so important to you? Because I'm not understanding. And so a couple things about this. We get to a point of understanding because we're getting more context. The other thing that we've noticed in research is it helps people stay calm. Because right now I want to be aggressive, I'm defensive, I'm ticked off at you. And it gives me a little bit of space between what's happening to create some understanding, and it gives me a chance to calm down. So don't try all of these on, but I love the say more or tell me more about that. So if I'm feeling a little bit triggered, it doesn't have to be around VHL, but something's happened, and I'm like, oh, tell me more about that. And then I get to understand somebody. When somebody also feels understood, they're more open to your feedback. So you can say, oh, well, when that happened, I actually felt really disappointed because I had asked you to do that and you didn't do it. So I felt like I didn't matter. And so people are more willing to have that conversation, and we can avoid the conflict through understanding. And so when we think about boundaries is often something that's a big deal. Somebody's been stepping over our boundary and we haven't been telling them what we need. We feel resentful. We feel angry with them. We feel unheard. And so when we think about setting boundaries, we want to think about what boundaries do we need to put in place in order to live within my values. And my values just means like true to myself, so that I'm not resentful. So I'm not thinking unkind things about you in the middle of the night, and use that MRI of the other person. So my most respectful interpretation of that person is this in that situation. They're caring and they don't know what to do. And I'm just picking a random example. So that's my most respectful interpretation of them. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm going to choose to try that on. I'm taking that perspective. But it also means we ask for what we need. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
So out of curiosity, how do you, with boundaries, I guess as the caregiver and also as a patient, with VHL fatigue, how do you change that up a little bit? Because I think a lot of patients have, the VHL fatigue where they get done with one treatment and then they're on to the next.
Oh,
So
totally.
how as a caregiver can I help support that by not doing the same thing every time, by being like, it's okay, we'll get through it. But I know damn well that they're going to go through another treatment, right? So,
Yeah.
and, it's kind of like a catch-22, but I also want to be positive. So how do I do
Yeah.
that?
I would start with empathy, and then ask some questions. So I bet this is so hard. And you also get to have space to have this similar conversation, either with your partner or with somebody else, because you deserve to be heard. Lots of empathy, and also self-regulate, because we oftentimes also have a hard time being with people's feelings. So we want to just like, it's just hard to be here. And it's okay to recognize that. It's also okay to say that this is hard for me, and it's hard for me to see you struggle. Ask, I ask questions like, what's the hardest part for you? And if it's in a partnership, can I tell you what's the hardest part for me? And if it's not in that conversation, so that you stay connected, because you can really love each other well, even though there's a lot of suffering. And you know that because you've been in this for 3 decades.
Yeah.
I asked them, what gives you like something like, what gives you hope knowing that this could happen again? And I'm not saying ask all these questions. So then you can build on that. They come up with that. And then you can share too. What gives me hope is just the resilience that we've seen, or the fact that we're together in this, or how strong our family is, or, maybe faith or something like that. But I try to see where they're at by asking questions. Like, so tell me what, helps you navigate this, or I know that this isn't the end for you. So what helps you stay resilient in all of this? Or be really honest and say, I always feel like kind of bouncing to soldiering on. And I do that because I love you and it's hard to be here. How can we soldier on together? Or is it okay if I'm positive? Because that might be a quality that your partner is just like, thank God Elizabeth is like that, because we need some positivity people, and it might be just fine. But some people might need to be in their space for a while. And so the well-being program that I created was actually taught to doctors first to support their VHL patients. And because they too are they want to help people, but we don't exactly know how. And so one of the best questions that came out of that was empathy. So imagine how they're feeling. I imagine this is so hard, or frustrated or disappointing or devastating or whatever. And they'll automatically tell you how they feel. And then one of the best questions the doctors came back with was, I said, ask what's the hardest part. And sometimes we feel afraid to ask that. And sometimes it's important to ask ourselves that as VHL patients, journal through that. What's the hardest part? What am I the most afraid of? But it gets us to the basics of it. And we naturally, oddly, as resilient people, will then bounce. Yeah, that is hard. But
I actually don't think I've actually ever asked him that, to be honest with you.
No, a lot of us don't, because we're devastated. I don't want to ask my kid, what's the hardest part?
Yeah.
I'd be like, I don't think I can do that. But what they noticed was the person would be there for about 10 minutes, the doctors, and then they would bounce to their own hope or their own resilience, or I'm so grateful for this person beside me. And you would see them naturally bounce, but they got permission to be with the lowest of the low. But naturally, people's brains tend to bounce, and more effectively than if we tried to like bring them there. And so it can be a really beautiful, intimate conversation, and you see them bounce fast, and it creates really gorgeous connection, because you're like, thank you for telling me that. And sometimes what we think is the hardest part is not the hardest part. So it's even astounding to go, that's the hardest part, right? My husband just lost his job, and he said, I worry you wouldn't love me. And I was like, oh, that's the hardest part. I was thinking mortgage payments. But it was really beautiful in all sincerity. And I say that with his permission, because we could be there for each other, right? And I'm like, oh my goodness. Hello, you don't need to worry about me, right? And thankfully I can pay the mortgage too, now that I think of my own fear. So just a really beautiful opportunity, but they don't stay there. And that's the most beautiful thing about people. We're so resilient, and VHL people and caregivers, literally the most resilient people on the actual planet. I think everybody should have a friend with VHL or a caregiver, because you're like, you want to see resilience? Hang out with these people. So, so important. And so when we think about setting boundaries, we want to think about what's okay and what's not okay. And if none of it is okay, none of it's okay. We're just like, hey, we can't talk about this at all. You could say, I'm okay to talk about, I don't know, the weather, vaccinations, well, the rig. I'm not okay talking about where I get my surgery or whatever. So you get to decide what's okay, what's not okay. The other good thing about this breakdown of it is that brains respond to positive things well. And so if you are saying, hey, you know, I'm okay to keep talking, but I'm not okay to keep talking about that, they're more likely to accept your feedback. So, so that can be really helpful, is I'm okay to talk about this. I'm not okay to talk about that. I'm okay to, you know, let's say talk about, you know, you're going through treatment, you're not feeling well. What's okay? I'm okay to go to that event, but I'm not okay to stay for the whole time. Right. And so even internally, we can be talking to ourselves for that. So like, I can't do this. Okay, maybe that's true. I can't do this. That's okay. But we can also kind of understand it. And so I love a framework that goes, what's okay, what's not okay. And the truth is, most of the time when we set boundaries, we will feel guilty. And so I'll end there, because people who are boundary specialists, like psychologists who study boundaries, say that guilt is a natural reaction. But just like if we went for a walk for 3 hours and we got tired, we wouldn't go, oh, what's wrong with me? Why am I tired? I just climbed a mountain. We'd be like, I'm tired. I climbed a mountain. She says, the professionals I've heard, take it as feedback that you did something brave. And then what we want to do is turn back to our support system of people who love us and understand how hard, number one, it was to set a boundary. For a lot of people, it feels like a miracle. And the hardest thing, climbing a mountain, whatever, setting a boundary with my sister-in-law, that's hard. Give me Everest any day. So guilt is feedback. It doesn't mean we're wrong. So we want to come back then to supporting ourselves. I did something brave. I live with my inside of my values so that I'm not resentful and seething all the time. I did that. And so we reach out to people who know and love us, because that guilt often can kind of move into shame, which is that, oh, who do I think I am? Or I'm not enough to set this boundary. And so reaching out to people that are kind and empathic. Yes, Gina, you set that boundary. Good for you. That must feel so hard. How are you? Talk it through. If you don't have somebody to reach out to, journal through your thoughts. And when you feel guilty or shame, know that it's a natural reaction. Just like I did push-ups today for my toes, tomorrow I'm going to have a sore chest. I don't go, oh, don't ever do a push-up again. That was terrible. Well, maybe, but I just take it. Oh, my chest is sore. I grew some muscles overnight. And so know that that is probably going to happen. And you can also say that if you feel like the person is safe enough. Look, Eleonora, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I can't have this conversation. I'm okay to talk about the weather in Italy, and I would love to talk about pasta, but I cannot talk about whether or not I'm going to take Wellerig. I can't. So it's, and I don't want to hurt your feelings. I love you. I love our relationship. So it's okay with the safe people to be a little bit more vulnerable about that you feel like this is a really hard conversation. Some people you can't be vulnerable because they'll be like, really, Gina, you want a boundary? You don't want to have this conversation? What about in 1975 before you were born? I didn't want to have this conversation and we did anyway. So there are some people like that. And that's when you need to know, you need to have an out. Like, let's talk about your hair or the weather in, you know, California, or the beautiful painting behind Melissa's head. So just because they can't take it, and you don't need to stay there trying to set more boundaries. You need to have a way out that feels healthy. So we are at the bottom of the hour, wherever you are in the world. And Eleonora, I don't even know what time it is. Oh, 8:30 for you, Eleonora? I think.
Yes, it's 8:30.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yes. And so if this is something that you want to continue talking about, let Josh or myself know. I'll put my email in here as well, because these are the kind of topics that we can take into our support group session. And I will do less talking and let people bring up more of their scenarios. But today I was asked to, bring a presentation and the time moves very quickly. So if this is something that you would love to come to a support call and you want to talk about anything, we always want topics, and otherwise it's just Josh and I emailing each other going, hey, what should we talk about? But if you feel like this or some other topic is relevant, we would love your feedback, because we're really here to build community and provide opportunities for support as well. So and if you have any questions, because we were pretty tight for time, I'm happy to have a quick conversation. If there's something that you want to apply this to, reach out. We can set up a 20-minute conversation and talk this through. And I'll also give Josh the deck and in a PDF. So if you want to look through some of this, then you can do that as well. But thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful to get a chance to meet you all. And I hope that we get to see each other again in the future. So thank you so much for your time. I sadly have a meeting that I have to run to, otherwise I would stay a little bit longer, but thank you so much.
Thanks, Leona.
Thank you, Leona.
Thank you.